In today's show, I'm going to be doing a Dynasty mock draft with Matt Lawson from FBI Basketball. You see him on Twitter at NBA Dynasty ADP. Michael Bolton, he's going to be here as well.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Okay, I'm going to thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Dynasty mock draft. We're going to be doing one. That's it. It's a category league mock draft. It's 12 teams. It's 20 roster spots, 10 active, 10 bench. I'm picking at 9. And we're going to go through. It's the first mock draft that I've done for this season, but it is a Dynasty one. Remember that. And I don't think we've ever done a full Dynasty mock draft on this show before. I went to do one last season with Matt, and I got an hour into it and realized I wasn't recording it. And didn't have the time to reset it or redo it, so we just scrapped it, unfortunately. But we are going to do it this time, and fingers crossed that the record button works, and this isn't just going out into nowhere. And we're going to talk about the picks that we made, and you're going to see the differences in valuation of players in Dynasty formats as a startup Dynasty draft. It's going to be including the rookies. I've already done videos on my Dynasty rookie tiers. I've already had Matt on pre-draft as well to talk about his valuation of the rookies. I didn't speak to him post-draft. Maybe we'll do that. We'll do that during this show. So we're going to do all of that in this show. Warnie.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
Actually, before we do, though, I've got to tell you about BetOnline because I don't want to interrupt the flow of the mock draft. Someone should just get it out now. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league, whether that's Major League Baseball, the NFL, which is back, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, or even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. And you can go check out the preseason action. Next preseason game, the Giants and the Patriots. Giants are 2-point favorites. How much Mac Jones do we see? How much Daniel Jones do we see? Well, if you know the answer to that, you might be able to see what the odds are and check it out. We've got an over-under of 34 for that game over at BetOnline. It's the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline is where the game starts. Let's bring in Matt and get this Dynasty rolling, I guess. All right, here he is. I've definitely hit record this time. We're ready to go. Matt Lawson, welcome back for your second go at a Dynasty mock draft with me, but the first one we're going to record and release. How are you?
I'm doing great, Josh. I am so fired up for this. We're in this lull in the NBA news cycle, but we are in Dynasty startup season. So getting to do a Dynasty mock right now, especially at this moment where so many people don't really know where the season is headed, this is the perfect time to be able to get some great value in your Dynasty leagues.
Yeah, you're right. It is a lull. I posted yesterday that Quinn Cook was signed by the Sacramento Kings, so that's how low things are at the moment in terms of news that's happening. We're doing a draft here on Fantrax, which, of course, Matt, is always the best place to do Dynasty leagues because everything you can want there is always going to be the best option to host your Dynasty leagues. Now, we're like 5 minutes away from this draft starting, so do you want to just run us through what the settings are, what the situation is with this draft before we kick off?
Absolutely. This is a pretty standard Dynasty startup draft. We have a 12-team league, 9-category, head-to-head. Each category counts toward one win in your matchup. So pretty standard and common for a Dynasty setup. What we're doing here is a 20-man roster per team, so there'll be 20 rounds. This allows you to be able to get deep enough into the player pool that most of the good prospects who should be rostered in a Dynasty league can be, while still allowing you to be able to be competitive at the same time. If you have too few roster spots, in your 12-team league, it ends up just being a churn and very difficult to be able to stash players who aren't getting immediate production. So I like to be able to hit that point where you're getting up to 240 players rostered. And that's what we have here with 10 starters, 3 guards, 3 forwards, 1 center, and 3 flex spots.
Oh, so we didn't decide to do 3 centers to make it. We should add 4 centers, honestly, if we're going to just follow onto the standard settings that some other formats might have. But we only got the 1 center starting, which is absolutely perfect for me, Matt. Before we head into this draft and we get into it, the other thing, 3rd round reversal we've got in this draft as well. For those of you who aren't aware, Matt is picking at 12. I am picking at 9 in the first round. Then we go on from there. But just give us a plug of what you do. And you've opened your new website. It's got all of your Dynasty ADP data and Dynasty ranks. So tell people about the leagues that you run and the information on your website.
Yeah, so our baby is Fantasy Basketball International, which is a community that we started on Discord to be able to host fantasy basketball conversation and the league chats for various dynasty, redraft, draft-only fantasy basketball leagues. And it's grown tremendously. We're around 1,500 members on our Discord at this point, hosting dozens of dynasty leagues, dozens of redraft leagues every year. And a lot of that is going to start opening up in the next few weeks with new redraft league opportunities available. But you can find all of our content and the ability to be able to join our Discord on FBIbasketball.com. That's where you're going to be able to find my dynasty rankings for both categories and points leagues, my dynasty ADP data, which you can't find anywhere else. And also things like my rookie rankings for dynasty leagues for this year, and our draft guide, which we're starting to fill in now, which has my minutes projections and rotation projections for opening night coming up in October. And also I've recently put together my projections and rankings for the 2022-2023 season. So those are available right now exclusively on my Patreon page, but soon enough they'll also be on FBIbasketball.com.
I'm going to put a link to the website here so people can join to find leagues. I am going to be jumping in a bunch of those draft-only leagues I'm expecting this season. Check out the Dynasty ADP, the Dynasty rankings, and we're going to go through this. We did speak, Matt, before the NBA draft about our rookie tiers and rookie ranks. We didn't talk after the draft. I did my rookie ranks, but we'll see how that plays out through this draft and how we value the players and how much of a change we had since we discussed that back in whatever it was, mid-June, when we talked about the rookies and their potential value heading into the season. We are, how far away are we? 2 minutes away. Let's flick into the draft room. Fantrax, by the way, updated draft room. So you'll see what that looks like over on the screen there. A little bit nicer than the previous one. I've just got to double check. Is that horn going to go off again? It better not. Oh.
I think it's off by default, which
Christ.
was a nice addition to the draft room. The updated draft room does not automatically blare that horn.
I can't find the button. Where's the horn button? I need to know. I need to get rid of it. Where is it? Oh no. We'll find out anyway. But it does look a lot nicer. You've got the chat over on the left. You've got the teams up the top. Much easier to see who's picking who and who's picking when in terms of rounds and players. The draft queue over on the right-hand side, my roster on the far right, and in the middle, the queue of players. Fantrax defaults to this weird ranking on their list, which is based on some Fantrax score, which I have no idea what it is. And it's based heavily onto totals and some other random concoction they have because they've got Miles Bridges at 4. So be really careful if you're going into a draft. You don't want to draft Miles Bridges at 4. Click the ADP tab, sort it that way. And we're off. We're ready to go. No horn, I think. Oh, mate, we'll see when it comes to my pick, whether we're horning up or not. Bryant Hoover. Oh, we had a noise. That's not a terrible noise, though. All right, so Nikola Jokic goes at number 1. Matt, I'm assuming there's no surprise there.
Yeah, he's been the consensus, and Luke has been the consensus at 2, which just went off the board there. Those two, 1 and 2, is pretty standard across dynasty leagues right now.
I'm going to mute that sound because it is going to annoy me. Chet Holmgren at 3. Wow, okay, so there's something that's wild. Now, that isn't reflected in your Dynasty ADP data. What are you making of that?
Well, so it's too high, but I do have Chet Holmgren inside of my top 15 at this point. And I know that's aggressive compared to some other dynasty rankings that I've seen out there, but I think it's warranted. I would not take him at 3, but I do love Chet's fantasy game, and I think he's a tremendous fantasy prospect.
Yeah, I think I had him at at 10 maybe. So I had him pretty high on the list there. LaMelo at 4. I reckon that might be a steal. I had LaMelo at like 3 or 2. So
he's a 3 for me.
Yeah. So I think that's like, you can talk about whether these other guys are better players than him. LaMelo's already like a top 10 guy and he's 21. Like, is he 21 yet? Has he even turned 21? I don't even know if he has.
He is turning 21 in like 2 weeks.
Yeah, there you go. Jason Tatum goes at 5. Yeah, fair enough. It's sort of about. I have a few other players ahead of Tatum. I had him a little bit lower than that. Where do you have him sitting at the moment?
I have Tatum at 4 right now because of youth and the fact that I think his steal rate probably comes back up. Last year was a little bit of a dip in that, but I think the peak of Jason Tatum looks like maybe a top 5 player for across his prime.
I was hoping Cade was going to slide to me, but it's my pick now. So you can talk about Cade and Edwards going at 7 and 8, and now it is my selection. And I don't. Oh, those guys though. Oh, I don't like those guys that just got taken. Do I do this? I'm going to take 27 seconds. I'm debating here Garland or Halliburton. I'm going to take Tyrese, and I don't love it. I wanted Cunningham or Edwards, and I didn't get them, so I'm going to take Tyrese at 9. How bad is that pick, Matt?
I love Halliburton this year, especially. It's kind of a rare situation where, despite being young, I might actually like him a little bit more in redraft this year than I do in Dynasty, just because I don't know if long-term he's going to get to be the primary creator, primary initiator of offense, for the long term. He probably will be for the short term for the Pacers, but he's going to be incredible this year.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and that sort of gives me, like, he's young, but it gives me value at that spot to even like build a more of a win now team as well. Like, yeah, Cunningham at 7 pushes you a little bit further into the future. Chet at 3 pushes you a bit into the future. Tyrese could end up at 9 this season. And you're right, like in 4 seasons, he might be 25th. And he might sort of go in the opposite direction to what you think. But yeah, I don't know. Garland was the other option there for me. But again, I hated that Chet and LaMelo and Cade and Edwards all went. They were the guys that I really wanted to get there. Trae Young goes at 11. Or 10, sorry, Mobley at 11. So let's talk us through what you're doing for your 2 picks here. I like Mobley at 11.
Yeah, so this is really interesting here. Joel Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns, Darius Garland still on the board. Really love all 3 of those players. And I don't think that I would probably go double center here, even though Cat now has forward eligibility as well and will play power forward this year next to Rudy Gobert. I think it's between those 3 for me at the turn here. And what I think I'm going to do is try to preserve some youth while trying to be productive at the same time. And I think I'm going to build around Karl Anthony Towns and Darius Garland with these 2 picks.
My top 3 that I had on the board were Embiid, Towns, and Garland. So yeah, I guess we're pretty aligned. They're the 3 names that you mentioned. They're the 3 guys I had at that spot. You'll notice guys like Kyrie and Kevin Durant are still sitting out there available. Another name that people might be a bit cautious or curious about is the fact that Jamal Morant is still around, but we don't love him as much in category leagues. Although he actually just went there at pick, whatever that is, pick 14, which again probably feels a little bit high for me. I know he's young, and I guess, and we've talked about this in the past with Dynasty, he might never ever have a top 14 fantasy season in category leagues, but if he's 25th for 10 straight years, that probably justifies a pick at 14.
I think that's right. It looks like you've come up here on the clock.
I am on the clock.
Scotty Barnes go at 15.
Okay, so I can go, I've got Embiid, who is falling a little bit, but we know that Joel is, 28 at the moment. I tell you who I might pick here, and I better make that call soon. I'm going to go with Shea. There you go. Let's go guard heavy. I'm going to take Gilgeous-Alexander. I probably should have gone Embiid. He's really good, but there's a lot of risk, and the age profile, Shea's 24 versus Embiid being 28, and comparing that with Halliburton. And I think, again, there's a possibility that Shea can push close to this number in redraft as well. So I think so. What do you make of Barnes going ahead of Shea?
That's tough. I have them very close in my rankings, but I do have Shea higher. With Barnes, I think what we saw last year was really interesting because it wasn't the player that we thought he was going to be coming out of Florida State.
Not at all.
Florida State, he's playing as a 6th man, on ball a ton of assists, high steal rate. And we didn't really see that player because he played a different role for Toronto last year. But I think he's going to start becoming that more on ball, heavy assist player. And that with the rebounding, with the offensive aggression that we hadn't seen before. Barnes could be really special, but his fantasy game isn't there yet.
Paolo Banchero goes next. Now, I had a look at a quick peek at your Dynasty rankings, and he wasn't ranked this high. Someone mentioned to me, I don't know where they commented, they said, hey, I'm doing a Dynasty startup. You guys can see what's happening in the picks if you're on YouTube here as we just discussed things. Embiid went after Banchero. They said, yeah, I'm doing a Dynasty startup. He goes, it's too aggressive for me to take Banchero in round 4. I go, round 4, there's no way. Like, he's going to go in round 2. And someone replied back, oh, shocked, round 2, no way. What are you talking about? And then I started second-guessing myself and I had a look at your things, your rankings, and you had him a little bit lower. I go, am I off that? But he's gone middle of the second round here. And I think it's totally fine. Obviously, my gut feel initially was second round, probably late second round, so maybe he's gone a bit higher. But Paolo at that spot, ahead of Embiid, ahead of Curry. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Apollo's ADP is at 21.2 coming out of the series of mock drafts we just did. And I've moved him up to number 26 in my rankings because I think he's just going to have great opportunity even as a rookie. When you have that level of production, when he's only going to be 19 years old to start this season, he has to be in that range of the second round of a 12-team startup.
So we went Banchero, and then we went Embiid, Steph, Bam. So we've got guys like Durant, Irving, Harden, all sitting around here. It's starting to get to that interesting area where these guys who are top 10, top 12 players fall into the 20s and 30s, and you've got to start to make those calls as to which direction you're building your squad. Devin Booker goes there after Bam. That's probably about right. I had him quite close to the top of my board at this spot. Donovan Mitchell goes next. He was close to that as well. This is probably, again, similar to his redraft value, maybe a little bit higher. And then Jaron Jackson. Now, that one from Matt Chilson, which we'll talk about, because it's coming back to your pick in a second here. I'll talk about that while you get prepared for your pick. That's bold, right? Because Jaron's going to miss time this season. He's picked Luka Doncic. So those guys were in the same draft, on the same time frame, but we know Luka's already top level, top 10 sort of a player. And you're going to miss Jaron for the start of this season. So it is, I guess there is that future value there, and I'm annoyed that Jalen Green just went because I wanted to see if he'd slide to me. It is interesting to see that Jackson might miss 3 months of this season, and your second round pick for this dynasty, when you've got Luka, you may be wiping that out already, although Luka is young enough to build through to the future. I'll get your thoughts. So tell us what you're thinking here with your pick after your first
Yeah, so this is a
selections.
real fork in the road here with guys like Damian Lillard, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Anthony Davis still on the board. Obviously, I have a younger build here, and I'm pretty insulated on free throw percentage. So I'm going to take a little bit of a Hail Mary. And going to be taking Zion Williamson.
Oh, so I wanted. Oh, man. I like it. I really like it. It's a great pick. I think he's going to dominate this year, to be honest. I think he's going to put up. Okay, let me throw this out at you, Matt. Do you think Zion can average 30 points per game this season?
If there's any development or growth from what he did in his sophomore season, absolutely. I mean, this was one of the most efficient scorers at the rim that we've ever seen in the NBA, even up there with Giannis numbers. So there's really no reason that he can't reach those heights as long as he's able to stay healthy.
Yeah. Okay. Jonte Murray goes next. NBA villain number 1. Jonte Murray's losing his mind at the moment in the offseason. Just every day there's a clip of him doing something stupid. But that's just basketball. That's just what happens. It's not really. Like, if you're a professional basketball player, you don't bounce the ball off the players' heads when they're laying on the ground. That is just real shitbloke territory. And we'll see what happens during the season. But he definitely is uncorking a few things here after getting traded from San Antonio. Now, I'm going to have to buckle down here and really figure out what I'm going to do because, Jabari Smith, he was like at the top of my list as well. All right, because I'm relatively young, but I'm not super young. What am I going to do at this spot? Durant's still there. Harden's still there. How crazy do we go here? Let's, you know what? This is pick number 28. All right. I'm going to do it. It's mainly for the memes. But I'm going to take old mate Alperen Şengün.
It's a delicate dance in just
Josh,
17
Basketball Monsters
steps.
opening next Monday, which is a very important day on my calendar. Or at least that's what I've heard. And I cannot wait to see where you have Alperen Şengün after that. Seeing that, that's very exciting.
We are opening next Monday, the 15th. And where have I got Alperen? I don't think it's as high as what people might expect. So I'm a little worried about foul trouble, but their backup center is nobody, really. It's Usman Garuba, so they're going to have to play him minutes. I think he's at around 50 from memory.
That's around where I have him too, because I try to be conservative with it. Obviously, if he plays huge minutes, I mean, the sky's the limit.
If he plays 32 minutes, he'll be a third round sort of guy. I'm just going to double check that, give you guys a bit of a spoiler. I haven't finished the projections yet as to where Şengün is coming out in that, and we'll get back to this draft. Actually, no, I have him even lower because I have him projected at under 30 minutes to try and be cautious with it. I've got him inside the top 70 at the moment. So that is being a bit cautious, and I do expect him to be better than that most likely, but there's a level of caution that I have applied to his projection at this point.
I have to say, I love how the Rockets are insulating Şengün and maybe some of his defensive deficiencies, adding Jabari Smith and Tari Eason. I think long-term, that's going to make it possible for him to hit his ceiling.
All right, so after Şengün went Josh Giddey, then Zach LaVine, then Anthony Davis, and now Domantas Sabonis. So we're starting to see those veterans go, and I reckon I'll spoil it a little bit when it gets back to my pick. I am going to try and take one of these guys that's fallen, whether that's a Harden, an Irving, Durant, any of these players who are around, these older guys. I might just chuck one of those players in because I've got some guys who are young, obviously with Şengün and Halliburton, and Shea is 24, but I think with my guys and with your players as well, it's very easy to make an argument that they actually finish at this spot this season. Like I could easily see Halliburton top 10, Shea top 20, and Şengün top 30. Like I don't think that's a stretch. So it doesn't put me in the, well, I'm definitely building for the future mode. Whereas I am, but I can insulate myself with some older guys. And I think the same thing with you with Towns at 12 and Garland at 13 and Zion at 25. They could all very, very easily finish in that position.
Yeah, that was my idea, and I think that's why you go younger in the early rounds in Dynasty startups, because you can get both production and youth at the same time early on.
Yep, absolutely. And then after Sabonis, it is Durant, it is Van Vliet. So I'm not sure how many of these young or these older sort of players are going to get back to me, but as you can see, the top of the queue here on Fantrax, Harden, Lillard, James, Paul George, Irving, Gobert, Beal. Even Siakam's a little bit older than Jimmy Butler and Vooch. Majority of those guys are 30 years old. After Van Vliet goes Jaylen Brown, and then we're ready to finish off round 3 with Bryant, who's picked Jokic, and then Jalen Green, and he's going for his third selection now. We'll see how that pans out. And he did take Kyrie there, which is tremendous value for when you got the number 1 player. You might have a top 10 player there in Kyrie as well, and Jalen Green's probably going to give you some future insulation, but also some decent value. That's a pretty strong team to build up. With Kyrie, but who knows how long Kyrie's career actually lasts. We just don't know what's going to happen with him.
Kyrie, it's fascinating because he has an ADP right now in their latest series of mocks at 50.8. So people stayed away pretty heavily, even though he can be easily a top 10 player on the court, top 5, at times per game. So
that's crazy.
It's an ultimate dice roll, but I think there's value in that. And I think you should be looking to acquire Kyrie if you're a contending team in the Dynasty League.
Harden goes next. And then DeAndre Ayton. Yeah, that team, Harden, Irving, Jokic, like that's legitimately 3 top 7 players basically for this coming season. It's a pretty strong team. Franz Wagner, that's an interesting pick. And then Lillard goes after that at pick 40. Wagner was at 39. We're getting back closer to my selection. So LeBron's still there. Beal, Gobert, George, DeRozan, Chris Paul. The headmaster, Jamal Murray. He goes next at 41. I don't expect there to be huge amounts of limitations on Murray this season. I know some people are really worried that he's going to just miss all back-to-back. So that's just not a common thing for ACLs. Like, it's just, I know we're all scared by Jonathan Isaac, but it's just not a common thing that an ACL takes 2 full years out of your schedule and it limits you to one year missed and then half a year gone from resting. He will rest initially. But there are some people I've seen worried that he's going to play like 27 minutes a night, and I don't think that's a concern at all.
Yeah, I think there were some quotes from Mike Malone about taking it easy on Murray early in the season, and that might be true. I think he wants to get his confidence level up. That was the thing that was mentioned at the end of last season, that he didn't have confidence in the knee yet. So I think they'll be slow at the beginning of the season, but I think that won't last very long.
We've got, after Murray goes Tyrese Maxey, then Paul George. Now it's my pick, and I am going to maybe target an older player here, depending on what comes through. Beal was my option. I am going to... All right, this guy's not that old, but he's treated as if he's old. I'm going to take... am I going to do it? I was going to push Porzingis. Am I going to do it? That's tough. The other one who's there is Rob Williams, who's not old. Now, you know what? Let's just take Rob. Bang. Rob Williams. I was going to take Porzingis, but I'm going to take Robbie Williams instead. Give me some nice block insulation. Him and Şengün can get some blocks there. There is injury risk, of course, but again, like we've talked about so many times, he's 45th. Like he should exceed that ranking this season. And I guess the worry is just the persistent lower body injuries he's had, much like with Porzingis. But Rob Williams he's not even 25 yet. So yeah, pretty happy to get him there. Actually, that feels like a bit of a steal, to be honest.
It is, and I think right now, because he played through injury in the playoffs and he's missed obviously a good number of games in his young career, there's a little bit of value that can get Rob Williams in Dynasty right now.
Yeah, that's your pick here, but it is really important to note. Like I remember talking when I was doing a show regarding the way that turnovers skew rankings in fantasy leagues and how it can adjust people's opinion on it. And I said on a per game basis, Rob Williams was like 15th and Doncic was 30th if you include turnovers. And I go, that just doesn't show the reality of the value of those players. And then someone goes, oh, how about if you do totals? That'll definitely show because Williams missed so much time. I go, he missed 4 more games than Doncic did. And I think people don't realize Doncic missed that much time, or they think that Williams just was out the whole season because he had that injury in the playoffs. He played 64 games. There are plenty of players. I think Giannis played 67. Doncic played 68. There are plenty of players who played in that mid-60s range. It doesn't make him this crazy outlier. Yes, he did get hurt in the playoffs and played through that injury, but that, like I've tried to prove over my show plenty of times, it doesn't mean that he's going to get hurt again. He has had multiple injuries, but the narrative of him is that he just missed all of last season, and it just isn't true, really. The problem is he missed during the fantasy playoffs, and that's what people remember. After Rob Williams was OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, and then you took the big fella, De'Aaron Fox there, who absolutely ended last season on a huge tear, Matt.
That's right. I mean, and that's happened multiple times in his career where we're like, oh, De'Aaron Fox has finally figured out how to shoot. And, look how aggressive he's being offensively. And then it goes back to kind of the disappointing De'Aaron Fox the following year. But I think that the team is set up, obviously, for him to have the same finish, to start the season the same way that he finished it. And I think that Fox is, especially at this point when you're looking to be able to get assists before they dry up, I wanted to be able to lock into that. Having Garland earlier, wanted to make sure to get a few more. And I'm also taking here at the turn Kwai Leonard. And this is obviously a gamble too. But I think, needless to say, we know that Kwai, when he's on the court, is going to be a top 10 player. I don't expect him to play any back-to-backs, but when I'm getting him at pick 50, I have the ability to be able to have him miss some games, but still be able to get the benefit of Kwai Leonard being a top 10 per game player.
That's interesting. He was on my radar to come back around to me. One thing that is important if you are drafting off Fantrax, and we spoke about this off air, is that for some reason on this ADP list, Kawhi is listed with an ADP of 259. And I don't know why. I don't know why he's the only player that's falling through the ADP cracks, but if you are searching by ADP, he's never going to appear on this list until they make that adjustment. I know he missed all of last season, but so did Zion, and Zion's ranked 30, got the ADP of 38. So for some reason, Kawhi's just slipping through the cracks here. So if you do want him, you got to go search for him. He's the only player I found who sort of slipped through the cracks that much, and it is my pick. After Kawhi was Jimmy, it went then Miles Turner, and I've got the chance to get Porzingis again. Or what do I do? All right, this one. See, the two names I'm thinking here is Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson, but they might be complete pumpkins in 2 years' time. They're really going to be like putting up numbers on a shit team, and then things go awry after that. You know what I am gonna do? I'm just gonna take. I don't like that either. Oh, damn it! No, I'm gonna take Porzingis. Let's roll the dice. Porzingis was a top 17 player in Washington, so. Do I have faith in him? No. But am I okay with getting him at 53? I think so.
Josh, I think we had our first party foul of the draft. It looks like that you just missed.
Oh, you bastard.
Getting that one in. But so we'll undo it and get you back on the clock so you can make your selection.
That was too much talking on my end. There we go. Thank you. That is what I wanted to do. Because Miles Bridges is ranked 4th on the auto rankings there for Fantrax. I was talking too much. Matt said that Miles could have been a podcast moment. I didn't even realize that I took Miles because I clicked on Porzingis just as the time went off, and I saw Porzingis appear in the chat as someone selecting him, and it wasn't me, apparently. So there you go. I took Porzingis in that spot. Just too much waffling on my end. Jordan Poole goes. That's one where I could see Poole dropping from last season, but then in 2 years' time exceeding this number. So it's a tough sort of one to balance. But this is a team that picked him that's got Embiid, Levine, and George. So I don't know where and he picked Cade early. That to me, not to throw any shade here on Big Sweezy, it's a little bit of a confused team to me, having Cunningham that early and then going quite older with those other three players. What do you make of a construction like that?
Well, the one thing that I want everybody to remember, too, is that you don't need to come out of the Dynasty startup draft with that being a team that is cohesive and makes sense by itself. This is your biggest opportunity in the history of a Dynasty league to be able to get value. So if you think you're getting incredible value, you're going to be able to turn it in a trade. I'm okay with a team that doesn't make logical sense as far as older players and younger players, as long as you're pursuing value. You just have to be ready to trade. But obviously, I don't think that makes a lot of sense if you're going to try to play with this team right away, because Poole is going to be suppressed a little bit in the short term.
Yeah, it is. It's getting value there. I think, Poole can have some top 30 seasons, but it probably won't be this season. And again, you got to try and you never want to be in that sort of making the playoffs, not making the playoffs. That's no man's land like it is in the NBA, and you got to try and thread that needle as to where you are. And sometimes having those teams, unless you're making trades, those sort of teams where they are a little bit confused like that can end up pushing into that sort of position, which can be rough at times. Gobert, that is wildly late for Gobert. I know he's older, but at 57, that's pretty good value, I think, there for Mr. Black, who went older with Durant, Lillard, and even took Booker. That's a massively strong redraft team, and you have to think that sort of squad, is really in to compete straight away.
Yeah, Gobert always falls a little bit further because people are bored with him, just like they are for Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, he's a great player. He's a great player in fantasy, but people in Dynasty have gotten a little bit tired of getting the same thing every year, which is great production.
Okongwu goes after that. That's probably one for a year's time. There is a chance that there is a 24-24 split with him this season, but maybe not happening. Wendell Carter, that's interesting. I wonder what they do in that front court, Matt, with... I've interacted with people who have said, they're really worried that it's just going to be Bumba and Carter splitting minutes, and I think that would be A, insane, and B, not likely to happen. But do you have any worry about Banchero and Isaac and Akiki and Carter and Bumba all in that front court? I just think it's pretty clear. You give Wendell 30, you give Banchero 33, and everyone else just fight over the rest. But are you worried about how that plays out?
No, I think you follow the money on that. Wendell Carter has a long-term contract. Mo Bamba doesn't. Mo Bamba essentially has a one-year deal. They kind of bailed him out, and there's a team option on the second year. So I'm not really concerned about them prioritizing Bamba's minutes over Carter. I think Carter is a better fit, especially because of the spacing that he showed with his improved shooting last year. And defensively, he's just much more of a solid player. Bamba's just too slow-footed to be able to be out there, especially when you don't have as much defense with Paulo Banchero.
What do you make of Jalen Duren, who went there at pick 61, going ahead of Keegan Murray at 63?
That would be too high for me. I really like Jalen Duren a lot. I think that he's in a great position. He's going to be catching lobs from Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey for a long time, but I would definitely take Keegan Murray over him and would have Duren more in the 80s of a startup than taking him here in the 60s.
LeBron went at pick 64, which, again, is on that team that we talked about with Gobert, Lillard, Durant. Like, this Mr. Black's team is probably going to crush it this season. You would think that he's the number one team heading into the value is going to drop off pretty quickly, but that is some real value. Jaden Ivey, that is insanely high to me. Ivey we spoke about this pre-draft, he doesn't have the greatest fantasy profile with some iffy percentages and lack of defensive stats and not necessarily high assists as a point guard. That feels a bit crazy to me.
His ADP is right about there, actually, 65.7. So that's exactly where he's going. And we are in rookie hype season. Post-Summer League, this is when the rookies tend to go the highest. Then reality sets in when October and November basketball starts, and these guards especially struggle. So not the best time to be buying Jaden Ivey right now.
After Ivey went Ben Simmons, then Des Bane. I was going to take Bane with my last pick when I took Porzingis, and I'm going to do a Grizzlies preview show later on today, and I'm going to talk about Bane and perhaps maybe some regression coming this season. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but he's still got some value. So I've got two guys in my queue, Keldon Johnson and Isaiah Jackson. I'm going to get one of them. getting Isaiah Jackson to add to Şengün, Porzingis, and Williams really means that I'm pretty flush with blocks. Like I'm good. Like that's blocks sorted for me. And now I've got the choice between the two. But do I grab someone like Keldon, who I don't necessarily believe in long term, but maybe for the next year or maybe 2 years, he might average 25 points a game. And that has value, and maybe I can parlay that into a higher pick. Let's take Keldon. Before I end up with Miles Bridges, I better click it. Keldon Johnson, draft now. All right. So, yeah, I'm not massively high on Keldon long term, but I feel like getting him there gives me some nice appeal for this season. What are you targeting as we're 2 picks away from you?
So there's still a lot of win now production on the board. Guys like who are, everyone's a little bit bored with Terry Rozier, Drew Holiday, DeMar DeRozan, Chris Middleton, Nikola Jokic. I mean, there's big men like, Jakob Poeltl, Jonas Valanciunas. So we're really reaching a range here where you have to make decisions, because otherwise you're getting some younger players who aren't going to get a lot of production. I love Lonzo Ball's fantasy game. I'm terrified of his knees. I do like the report the other day that he is going to be ready for the season. I don't know if that's true because we've heard that before.
Yeah, the Bulls lie a lot. I wouldn't be so. Zach LaVine, there's nothing wrong. No, his knee's fine. Just has surgery on it. Like, no worries. I'm sure he's all good.
Well, and there Lonzo goes. So at this point for me, I think that there's enough immediate production on the board, and I'm going to go in that direction. I'm going to start out and I think I'm going to take Terry Rozier here, who, on a team that now does not have Miles Bridges and probably will not, is going to at least maintain his usage, if not increase it. I think he's going to get relied on heavily, and he just continues to stack up really productive seasons, even though it's a little bit boring. And I want to be able to continue to get some of these big productive guards early on before they dry up. On the other end here, this is a little bit more difficult. I think I'm probably going to take Vooch because I think there's a lot of value in it. To be able to get a big man who gives you that steady production across all categories, still a really strong rebounder, and put up some decent blocks last year as well. I like the value of getting him at 73 to be able to round out my roster.
Are you ready for a hot Vooch take, which I don't know if I fully believe in, but I could see it happening? I think that this has a real chance of being the last season that he is a 30-minute-a-night starter. I don't know where he goes from here.
I made that argument with people too. So part of me was not believing in the take that I just gave about drafting him. I think he will still be productive because his fantasy game is just so strong. But I think the Bulls have already intimated that they're interested in getting off of him. We heard those rumors this offseason. And bringing in Drummond suggests that they want to be able to play a little bit differently at center than they do with Vooch. I think that there's something to that, and we might be seeing a decline from him, like we did for stretches last year, where his production really dropped.
Yeah, he was rough at times last season for sure. Definitely not at that top end second round value that he was drafted at in certain situations. Now, I am at this spot where DeRozan's there. Like we're sitting at pick 75 or whatever it is. Like, do I take DeMar? I don't know. Like he is older. I don't expect him to have huge amounts of value as we move forward. How old is he? He's 33. Again, I think there are other options similarly. I reckon I'm going to take Kuminga went. This guy would have gone second round last season, and that's Maga Porter Jr. Let's take the flyer. If it works, I'm pretty happy with that. Like, if the back is fixed, and I don't know that it is, but I'm happy with taking the risk at pick 76 with Michael Porter Jr.
The concern that I have with Porter Jr. is that back problems don't necessarily ever get fixed.
It's true.
They're just going to need maintenance. And I think that we could have another stretch from him like we did in the 2021 season where he's healthy. And he's going to be a really good fantasy player when he is. So I'm hopeful for that. I want to see the Nuggets at full strength, and I would like to see Porter Jr. playing the way that he did a couple seasons ago.
I want to talk about the 2 picks that are bookending my pick there. Kuminga, 1 pick before, and Pat Williams, 1 pick after. To me, there is just so much other production on the board who I think is going to actually produce in the interim that they seem crazy to me. I don't believe in Pat Williams long term. I think Kuminga's solid enough. He has some holes in his fantasy game, but to me, with guys like even someone like Bones Highland, not to spoil if you were going to pick him. I've got to pick before you anyway. Isaiah Jackson, Kevin Porter, Jalen Brunson, these guys are available to me. Like, I just don't believe in Pat Williams, and to a lesser extent Kuminga, but to me that's wildly high.
I think with Pat Williams, if you believe in it, it's because you see someone like Jaylen Brown, and the way that Jaylen Brown came into the league raw with an undeveloped fantasy game, was actually kind of a poor fantasy player to start. And you saw that slow development curve for wings who were drafted really high in NBA drafts happen. And I think that's the case to make for Pat Williams, but I can definitely see the downside too. There's a lot of risk with him, and he would need to develop quite a bit in the coming years to be able to get to that level of even a Jaylen Brown.
You can make the argument for Isaac Okoro, but I don't see anyone jumping all over him to pick him at pick 70. Like, they're basically the same sort of guy. Like, Williams is bigger, but it's defense first wings who don't generate defensive stats and struggle with their offensive game and aggression and usage and shooting and passing and everything basically in their game. But Williams gets held to this really high level, like, oh, maybe. Whereas Okoro is like, no one even cares about that bloke anymore, to be honest. Even though he's only he's like a year and a half younger than the guy they drafted in the lottery this year in Agbaji. So it's interesting the difference between those two there. After Williams was D'Angelo Russell, then Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, Drew Holiday, Jim Wiseman. I have no idea what to expect from Wiseman. I think that he's in the spot here where we can take that sort of flyer, because if it does come together, the fantasy skill set is there. But we say that, Matt, about so many centers that if they just get 28 minutes, but often they're just not good enough or switched on enough or willing to sacrifice in certain areas of their game to get those minutes. And I'm not sure that Wiseman does that.
It's difficult to be able to have a guy who you both have to have him thread the needle on health and also developing into a smarter basketball player with better feel. And that's where we are with Wiseman. Obviously, if it does hit, it's going to be huge. But I think it's more likely than not that we don't get that top end outcome from him.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. Like, people can see on the screen, I've had Isaiah Jackson sitting in my queue. Like, I would take him over James Wiseman pretty much every day of the week at this point. Shaedon Sharpe, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. That's the team that just took Wiseman. That is all right. So we are really looking at 2026 here. That is aggressive to me.
Well, they also took Okongwu a little bit earlier, so this team is not playing for this season for sure. I think that's a choice.
The Sharpe pick is one of those ones where you're right. It's the new car off the lot sort of situation. It's the rookies. Hey, we don't know what these guys. There are so many. Like, again, I've mentioned Bones Highland. Like, Bones Highland has done it already at an NBA level. Sharpe might never do it. Like, there's always going to be, in general, one guy who stinks in the top 10 and another guy in the top 5 who really struggles probably. And, shout out Jarrett Culver. Like, Jalen Suggs struggled. I think Jalen Suggs is actually going to be good, but he struggled last season. Sharpe might be great. He might be horrendous. And he's not going to get the opportunity this season either. So that's a weird one to me. Rowan Barrack goes next, which, in category leagues, he's never been this good, and he maybe never will be. But as we talked about earlier, if he produces top 100, maybe even that might be a stretch, top 120 value for 10 years, then maybe there's enough there. He needs to improve so many different areas of his game. Anything stand out to you with those picks? McCollum, Jaden McDaniels, Sharpe, Barrett, Hero?
McDaniels is really interesting to me, and this might be pricing out some of the value on him, but I think he's going to have to play a pretty huge role for the Wolves this year. They need his defense on the court with the way that they're going to be playing, and also I think he's going to continue to improve as a shooter. The steal numbers haven't been where you would hope they would be for a guy who has a defensive profile, but I'm hopeful that his offensive game can develop enough that maybe he can earn this kind of top 100 production that he's being drafted for here.
Yeah, like I think that he'll be useful and he'll be good on the court. I'm just not sure there's going to be the greatest fantasy game associated with it. After Hero goes Smart, then Gary Trent, who I'm not particularly high on. It's just going to require just that unbelievable steal rate to continue. And in general, Matt, when I see someone who has like a top 2 steal season, I will price in a little bit of regression in that the coming year, and then that drops a little bit of his value. He's also got a player option after this season as well, so he might go to a different team and things might change significantly. After Trent goes Washington, and then it's me, and he's been sitting at the top of my list all this time. I'm going to do it. Let's just bite the bullet. Let's take Isaiah Jackson. Gives me some future upside. Blocks are absolutely locked down now with this squad, but again, I don't mind, like as you said earlier, I don't mind too much if there's some imbalance in a dynasty team. And just getting that value in there where I could have, Şengün and Jackson, who might be 2 top 30 centers in 2 years' time, I'm pretty okay with that.
You'd have to think Miles Turner is going to get moved at some point. And
well, he's a free agent this year anyway. Like, this is his last year in Indiana, almost irrespective of what happens.
And you can't imagine that they want to pay him, given the fact that they've had him on the block for so long. All right, I'm up here. And again, there's a whole lot of win now production still available. I kind of pivoted in that direction with my last couple picks. I think what I want to be able to do here is add a little bit more at the center position. I'm a little bit light as far as big men. Obviously, I have Towns. Zion gives you that amazing field goal percentage, and I took Vooch. But I want to be able to bolster that a little bit more. I think I'm ready to be hurt again. I'm willing to take Jusuf Nurkic.
So Nurkic over Valanciunas. Is that an age thing?
That's right. And I do have some amount of concern of, even though Jonas Valanciunas is willing to take some threes, he took a few more last year. How well is that really going to work with Zion on the court?
Yeah, I'm a bit worried.
I think it's going to reduce the amount that he's going to play. So I'm really going to steer into this win now. Take a guy. This is still a nice value compared to ADP. I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but getting the assist that I'm going to be able to get from Chris Paul at this point is going to be an area that's dried up at this point in the draft pool. So I'll throw him on top for a team that I'm now looking to be able to win this year with.
Yeah, it's tremendous value, and it obviously gives you a nice little boost here with your squad as it sits, and you've got a pretty nice redraft sort of team with some dynasty upside as well, so it makes sense for you to lean into a player like that. Like, again, there's just been an insane run on some rookies here, like Mark Williams going at that spot. Like, I don't think Williams is a lock to start this. In fact, if I know Steve Clifford, and I sort of do, I don't think that he's going to play huge amounts. He's not going to play, and I wanted Bones High on there, so I'm annoyed that this bloke took him. After Chris Paul went Highland, when Benedict Mathurin is back to my pick, you know what? Let's do it. Let's go with Kevin Porter Jr., who, like your mate De'Aaron Fox, really turned it on at the end of last season. Do I believe in that long term? 100% no. But I'll take a crack at it right here and see exactly where he ends up. And let's hope that, for my sake, in this situation, that he is their point guard of the future, although in my heart, I absolutely do not believe that. Herb Jones goes after Kevin Porter. And let's get back to the Pelicans to let some more of this draft play out. And you talked about Valanciunas. Like, they're going to start, I would guess, McCollum, Jones, Ingram, Zion, and Valanciunas. But then you got Devontae Graham. You've got, who's, again, not a long-term piece for them, but Trey Murphy's surely going to have a larger role this season, and playing Zion at center is going to enable him to get into more of those lineups. And there's Jackson Hayes as well. So, yeah, Valanciunas, I do worry a little bit about his production and how it fits with Zion. Again, they've played 0 minutes together, so we don't know. And if Valanciunas plays 27 instead of 31, I don't think anyone should be shocked at that.
That's my take on it as well. And it's an interesting depth chart in New Orleans because especially once you get Dyson Daniels starting to get minutes, once Kira Lewis potentially comes back from an ACL tear later this season, you have Jose Alvarado still there.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how they fit all these pieces together from a team that was successful last year without a lot of the guys who are going to be coming into the rotation this year.
They're not the deepest team, but they're not far off, to be honest, in terms of figuring out that rotation. And players like, I don't know what the hell's going to happen with Devontae Graham, because you could argue he's their third best point guard, and then Dyson Daniels takes over to become that third guy, because there's McCollum and then there is Alvarado as well. Graham offers different things to those guys, but like, who knows where it fits? And then you're getting 25 minutes out of Trey Murphy, who might be in their closing lineup. Like, how do you figure it all out? There's a lot to sort of sort through with that. After Jones was Sadiq Bey, Andrew Wiggins, Sticks, Jalen Smith, Valanciunas, and then Tari Eason. Again, the rookie run is remaining almost undefeated here. I like Eason. Again, that is wildly high for me for Dyson Daniels. I don't know how great he's going to be, and I don't know how much he's going to play this season. That's pretty wild to me for him to go at that point. How does that align with your ADP data on Dyson?
Dyson's going a little bit outside the top 100, and kind of like he went here. I think that a lot of people probably are seeing the high assist rate, the good steal rate, pretty good rebounds because he's about 6'8" and shoes. There's a Lonzo Ball kind of stat profile when it comes to Dyson Daniels. But I like the fact that he's with Fred Vinson, who helped turn Lonzo Ball into the shooter that he is now. But I do agree with you that a role this year is going to be difficult to come by. So with Dyson, I would be more willing to try to acquire him later when the minutes are few and his value drops a little bit.
I'm getting to a stage where I don't really know what to do with my next pick. We had Fultz go at the top there of round 10. There is value sitting around here. Capella, Jeremy Grant, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Kyle Lowry.
Double cheeked up on a Thursday afternoon.
Brandon Clark. Jalen Smith is for some reason still sitting in my queue, and I know he's been picked, so I don't know what he's doing there. So after Fultz goes Klay, then Draymond Green. So we're getting some of these older guys off the board now. I've got a lot of big men. Şengün, Porzingis, Williams, Isaiah Jackson. But there is a name as a big man that is standing out to me. I don't think long-term he's a starter, Matt, and that's Isaiah Stewart. But I think we might get a little bit of value out of him this season.
I really like Isaiah Stewart, and honestly, when we did this dynasty draft the first time last year, or earlier this year, we had Isaiah Stewart much higher than this. But I think that he's a really good defensive player. I like the fact that he has some touch. He showed improved free throw shooting at the end of the year, and they finally allowed him to shoot three-pointers, which he was not allowed to until the end of the season when Dwayne Casey finally allowed him to do it. And this is how Dwayne Casey thinks about big men, slowly increase their role. And we've seen that with different guys over time that Casey has coached at the big man position. So I like Stewart this year, and I think there's a lot of value right now because people have soured on him.
They definitely have, and I could see maybe at some point he works in next to Duren, but I don't know. I want them to start Isaiah Livers. I don't think they will. I think they'll do something completely stupid and start Marvin Bagley there just to make things as difficult as possible for Cade Cunningham, because when you got the opportunity to stifle the growth of one of the best players your franchise will probably ever have, you got to take every opportunity to do it, and that includes with a terrible coach and a terrible non-shooting, non-defense big man. That's enough Detroit slander. My pick, I've chucked Emmanuel quickly at the top of my queue. I don't think that he's going to go before my pick, but is he someone who's being targeted at all? I think there's a chance he could end up in Utah this season, and if we did this in 3 weeks after that trade goes down, or if that trade goes down, that he'd jump way up this queue.
Yeah, I like Quickly a lot. What a great finish to the season. Yep. I know that's a common theme that we've been bringing up, but I mean, with Quickly, was finally getting the opportunity that he should have been getting over Alec Burks earlier in the year, and he looked great. So I do hope he gets that opportunity, gets to play in Utah, and it looks like you are up with your selection.
Yep, because it went Hartenstein, Jared Vanderbilt, who's going to have a big opportunity this season, it looks like, Jeremy Grant, Jeremy Sohan. That is wild to me. Like, there is a lot. Okay, I like Sohan, but there's a lot of young players still available with value. It's just, again, it's the rookie allure that's there. So I did get Quickly with that selection. That rounds out my top 10 players. There's a chance Quickly plays 22 minutes a night this season because there's Brunson, there's Rose, there's Fournier, there's Grimes. Look, he might be way down the pecking order, but at some point, something's going to break free. Rose is eventually going to be let go by Tom Thibodeau from his clasp. Fournier is going to disappear at some stage. Things are going to happen, and Quickly is going to get an opportunity. It just might not be this year. Brogdon, that is... I wouldn't even want Brogdon at redraft at this point, let alone in Dynasty. That is... maybe they're expecting a Kevin Durant to Boston trade that opens up more minutes for Brogdon in either New York, or in Brooklyn, or in Boston, but no thanks.
Yeah, Brogdon has an ADP of 145.8 coming out of our last series of mocks. I think most people are pretty far out on him, and that's right. He just can't play enough minutes in Boston to have the value that he had in Indiana.
So what are you doing? Oh, Isaiah Stewart went, damn it.
He did. So this is actually pretty interesting at this point. We're 120 picks in. I think that there's some nice young players that I'm willing to invest in that I really like here. I'm going to take two former teammates that no longer play together, but I think both have opportunity for pretty good seasons this year. First, I'm going to take Brandon Clark, who obviously has a tremendous amount of opportunity with Jaron Jackson out at the beginning of this year. But long term, I think Brandon Clark and Jaron Jackson Jr. fit really well together. And I think there's opportunity for growth in Clark's game, even though he's a little bit older for a player who's only been in the league for a few years. Also here, I'm going to take one of our permanent champions who I hope is finally going to get a little bit more of a consistent role this year in Philadelphia. That's DeAnthony Melton, a guy who I love. I know many out there do. Jonas Nader, shout out. Melton is hopefully going to be able to play consistently. And if you do have a James Harden injury, if you do have something like that opens things up, we could really see some huge stretches from him.
I like Melton a lot, as people are well aware on this show. When the initial trade went down in draft day, there were so many people celebrating, man, he's going to start. He's played 30 minutes tonight. And I was like, no, it's not going to happen. And I think you need to calm down. And then I think people have settled back in. He's possibly, Matt, going to play the similar role in terms of minutes. He was a little bit up and down in Memphis. And you're right, it should be more consistent. But over 25 minutes a night feels like a stretch when Harden and Maxey are going to be playing 36 a night in both guard spots. And Melton's probably too small to play the three, and the three is going to be occupied by Tobias Harris, and Thibault is still there. So I think that if people were hoping for 28 minutes a night for Melton, I reckon they're going to be pretty let down.
I agree with that. I don't think that he's going to be able to get that kind of a role.
It's my pick. I'm going to take Cam Johnson. Needed to just make that. Walker Kessler. Ooh. Colin Sexton, that's an interesting one. I'm obviously not on a team at the moment, but yeah, that's not nice value for him. And Pandas underdogs, what is going on? Jake LaRavia? I like LaRavia. That's wild to me. How does that track with your ADP? Because I can't imagine that makes any sense.
LaRavia goes later than that in startups. I think that what you get here is the idea of taking these picks, these rookies, and just treating them almost as if they're still draft picks. You get to kind of put your hopes and dreams into them and kick the can down the road a little bit longer. Know that because they're young players, they're going to hold value for a little bit longer, and you don't really have to make a decision on where to go with your team. So you see people over-investing sometimes in rookies for that reason.
Yeah, there were just a lot of other players that I would rather take over LaRavia. Like, you can see on my queue, like Jalen Williams from OKC. Like, why wouldn't you take him over LaRavia? I don't get that. Like, Grimes and Murphy are second-year players, and to me, they've got significantly larger fantasy values and upsides heading forward here. So I don't get that at all. LaRavia goes, then Heald goes, then Cole Anthony goes. Do you reckon Anthony or Fultz is going to start this season? Based on the way this Dynasty mock went, people are investing more in Fultz and Anthony, and I tend to agree.
Yeah, I pivoted that. Initially, I had Anthony in my projections to be the starter, but in the last few weeks, I talked with enough Magic fans that they're pretty confident that Markelle Fultz is going to start. He obviously had a great finish to the season coming back from injury, looked great as a playmaker. And I think it can work because there's enough shooting in that lineup otherwise that he's such a reluctant shooter that he can still work offensively, even if Paolo's going to be on ball pretty significantly during the season.
I just had a look at this list, and Capella's available still, Lowry's available, Mitchell Robinson's still there, but a name that is... We're getting into Miles Bridges territory. Look, there's a legitimate chance that Miles Bridges goes to jail and doesn't play in the NBA again. Would you be willing to take a risk on him at this round? It's going to be round 12 for you when we get back to it?
Well, there's two different views on this. Number one, I'll put it out what my personal opinion would be. I think fantasy is supposed to be fun. I think it's supposed to enhance your ability to enjoy watching the game. And that wouldn't be very fun for me to root for Miles Bridges to come back given the allegations against him. But from a purely trying to win at fantasy perspective, I think that this is probably the range where you could take a flyer on that because so many of these young players that are out there will never reach the level that Miles Bridges already did. Almost none of them at this range that we're picking from are going to be as good as he was last year. His career is going to be altered by this. There's a good chance that he never gets the same kind of role going forward because teams will not trust him and he might not be paid in a way where he's going to get that kind of role depending on the outcome of the allegations. So it's a difficult situation, but there's obviously upside if he does get his career back on track.
Yeah, I won't take him. I know that. Like, 'cause the risk of never playing again is legitimately there. And you're right. I just don't want to have this bloke on my team. Like, simple as that. Like, maybe things get resolved and he's innocent. It's all not real, which seems really, really unlikely. But I don't care. That's fine. I'll let it go. Moses Moody goes. Then Jalen Williams goes. Williams was in my queue. There's a name that I've found that probably shouldn't be still available, and that's Kyle Kuzma. Why are people so... I am not a Kyle Kuzma fan, as people are well aware, but he was really quite good last season. So I think we're getting to the stage where it's like if Pokusevski and Jalen Johnson are going here to Kyle Kuzma, I reckon there's something a little bit off there.
Yeah, I mean, we're beyond Kuzma's ADP at this point. His ADP in the last series was 124.8, which is still a little bit low relative to the production he got from him last year. And obviously, with Beal back at full health, with Porzingis in the lineup too, you could see the numbers coming back a little bit, but he'd still be a good value here.
Some of these, like Dan Gafford goes ahead of him. I do like Gafford, but I don't know. There's some interesting builds here with players. I guess it's all, some of this stuff is eye of the beholder. Like this monkey tennis took Chris Duarte and Dan Gafford. I like Gafford. I don't like Duarte that much. They're just not guys that I would prioritize. And Jalen Johnson's a very, very deep pool. Maybe he's good. Maybe he's not. We actually have no idea because he's barely played. And they're just other guys that I think you can get more value out of. Like, Josh Hart's going to give you good numbers. And Mr. Black is going to absolutely run away with his first year pot, I would suspect. Maybe your team gets close to him, Matt, but his team actually your team is probably going to get close to him. But he's just picking up the value as it falls. Clint Capella goes there. Some of these guys you might get 1 or 2 years out of or of production out of, but Capella should beat this number at least for this season. So it's what makes Dynasty rankings, what makes Dynasty mocks, makes Dynasty drafts, Dynasty leagues really challenging, is that you have the categories portion of it, and then you have the competing, the tanking, the rebuilding, the valuations, the ups and downs, all that stuff adds extra dimensions onto things.
Yeah, and this is why I love Dynasty, because you have different levels of strategy and different strategies across your entire league. It just makes it so much more enjoyable, even more so than a redraft league.
So my mate Kyle Kuzma just went, which is annoying because I was going to take him. Then goes Portis, and then there we go. That decision has been made. Miles Bridges is gone. And he's in the chat, he said, I took him, not auto draft. Thank you for clarifying that. Now, I don't really need another center, so I'm not going to go with Mitch Robinson. I am going to take old mate Trey Murphy. I really believe in Trey Murphy as a player, and I think we'll see what happens with the Pelicans, but I think that in a couple of years' time, there's a 30-minute-a-night player in there with some real top 70 type upside. So I know him and Johnson are probably similar sort of players who I took back-to-back, but I don't care. I think there's both good value in those guys.
Do you think Trey Murphy is going to end up being a better fantasy player in the long run than Herb Jones, or would you have Herb above him?
No, I think Trey will be better, personally. I know Herb had some real value. People love quoting that he was top 50 last season. Yeah, that's total value and including turnovers, which I think is a horrendous way to view a player and their value. That's not the sort of player he is. I worry that he doesn't have the ability to scale up usage. The defensive stats are there, and he's a better offensive option than, say, Matisse Thybulle. But I'm not sure that Trey Murphy could be a 17, 18 point per game scorer with 8 boards, 3 threes, a steal and a block, and that's I think significantly better than what Herb could peak out at. Now Herb probably has a much higher floor and more consistency, but I think that Trey has the higher upside.
Yeah, I think the scenario where Z scores can not tell the whole story, especially when it comes to steals numbers, because Herb's steals were so extraordinary that it just completely blows them out of proportion in the perception that people have of their fantasy value. Absolutely. So Trey Jones just went off the board, which is interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. I am on the clock here to round out the 12th round. And there's a couple centers here that I think are going to have good roles this year in minutes. And being able to get them at, outside of the top 140 is pretty nice because they're both young as well. So I'm, even though I like his counterpart a little bit more from a per minute perspective, I'm going to take Mitchell Robinson here because Isaiah Hartenstein is already off the board. And I'm going to come back with the turn here and take Nicholas Claxton, his friend just down the way in Brooklyn, who should have a rather substantial role as a center this year because really the only other options on the roster at this point are Daron Sharp, who is also an interesting young big that I'll probably be looking at a little bit later on.
Yeah, I've got Sharp not far off the top of my queue at the moment. I think he's got some real significant upside, and he's super young, and he might develop into a better player than Claxton, so I do have him high up. So he's an interesting name there. The Robinson one is fairly no-brainer-ish at that sort of stage, I think, as much as, again, I'm with you, and I think Hartenstein's better. I don't think that really matters when we know which guy's going to play more this season. Zaire Williams, that's interesting. He impressed me last season. I wasn't a huge fan of the draft pick, but he did impress me, so that's a good selection there. And then we are one pick away from mine, so I'm just trying to figure out what I'm trying to do. I do have Quentin Grimes sitting in my queue. Do I just double down on the Mitchell to New York train and hope that either quickly or Grimes moves across into a large role? Grimes is a really interesting player, I think. He can be a lead ball handler. He can be a good shooter. He can be a high-level scorer as well. But there are other guys out there who are going to produce immediately. And has he got Lowry there? Is Gordon Hayward still available? It is my pick now. Zubats is still there. There's a lot of older guys. You know what? Let's just, at this point, I'm just going to take Monty Morris, I think. I need some point guard numbers. I need some guards. He's not exciting, but he's good at this spot.
He's got to play minutes, obviously. They don't really have anything at point guard beyond him. And it's difficult because we obviously saw him in a starting role last year, a pretty large role. Do you think he's going to be playing significantly more minutes than he did last year in Denver?
I think he only played 30 minutes a night, so I think he can get an extra 1 or 2 minutes. And I didn't know this, but I think towards the end of the season, he was about, I didn't know this because I could have seen the information, but it didn't really click in my head when I was talking about him a few months ago. I think he was like top 75 over the last 2 months. But I think the initial, much like the D'Anthony Melton thing, the initial reaction to the trade was, oh, wow, now he gets away from Jokic. He's going to have this huge usage spike. And that's just not true to me because Beal and Porzingis and Kuzma, they're going to be the usage guys. So he's going to probably see a usage decrease, I would expect, but we probably do see an increase in assists. He's just not a guy that's going to hunt his shots. He's super efficient. He's got one of the best assist-to-turnover ratios in the NBA. Him and Tyus Jones are nearly always 1 and 2 in that number. But I don't think he's going to have this gigantic offensive role going from playing next to Will Barton and Jokic, where he was third behind those guys, to now playing also with Will Barton, but Beal, Porzingis, and Kuzma as well, where he might legitimately be the 5th offensive option in that starting lineup.
Got some really interesting young players just selected after you. Josh Primo, obviously, he's going to have as much opportunity as he wants likely this year. I don't know what he's going to be able to do with it.
I'm not sure he's good. But I'm not sure. I think that, okay, let's put it this way. It's Primo, Wesley, and Branham, 3 guys all playing a similar position. Who do you think is better long-term?
I thought that Wesley was by far the most confident of the bunch and aggressive. He had a little bit of tunnel vision at points in summer league, but he probably has the most upside, at least being able to blow by people and be able to create space and advantage going to the rim. Primo, I think, can become a good shooter, but I don't really see a whole lot beyond that. Branham was a guy that I liked pre-draft, but disappeared in summer league, and I wasn't terribly encouraged for him to be able to become a primary or even really strong secondary creator long-term.
Yeah, that's basically how I see it as well. I think Wesley shows that most star upside out of that trio, but there is efficiency concerns for sure. But I think he can develop into... I think they're going to try and make Primo into a combo guard, and I don't think it's going to work, whereas I think that's what Wesley should become, a guy that, best case scenario, can become Bradley Beal or a Bones Highland, a guy that's sort of a point guard but also a big scorer. I think he's got that upside to do that. Let's just recap. You were talking about Primo, and then it was Little and Quentin Grimes, who I'm annoyed that Grimes went there. Then Herder, Ty Washington, Derek White, and Ivica Zubats. Sorry for interrupting you about those young guys. What do you got to say more about those guys?
Grimes is exciting. I mean, this is another situation where we're being held hostage with this Utah-New York situation with the Donovan Mitchell trade. Obviously, we've heard that Utah wants to get Grimes. They want him to be one of the key pieces. New York wants to hold onto him. And I think that's why part of the reason why the deal probably hasn't happened yet. But either way, it's going to be really interesting to see how Thibodeau handles Grimes this year, because he should play him. He should play him a significant amount of minutes. I just don't know if that means he's taking Evan Fournier out of the rotation. He's taking, his best friend Derrick Rose out of it, is quickly getting less minutes. It's difficult to be able to find how that's going to work in a Thibodeau rotation where the starters play such heavy minutes.
There was a report yesterday, I think it was, saying that the Knicks refused to trade Derrick Rose because Tom Thibodeau wants to keep him. Like, if that's the hold-up in a Donovan Mitchell trade, like, my guys, please just fire Tom Thibodeau. Like, what are we doing? The Rose is 34. He plays 40 games a season. He's really, really solid. But you've had Derrick Rose playing those 40 games the last 2 seasons. Like, what does it bring in you? Like, if that's the hold-up, then that whole organization needs to just shut it down. 2 guys got picked here who I just am not fans of at all. After Zubats went Norm Powell, Larry Markkinen, and then Cam Reddish and Johnny Davis. And I just could not be less excited for those players.
Yeah, Davis had an awful summer league, and everyone has been talking about how bad it was. I think that he's a guy who took a lot of contested shots at Wisconsin and carried the entire load for an offense that was built entirely around him. He's going to have to become a much better shooter to be able to be successful in the NBA, and that remains to be seen whether he can do that.
Yeah, I don't remember. I was pretty down on him pre-draft, and so when the summer league happened, I went, okay, this is not a surprise. Like, I'm not massively into this guy. How were you seeing him before summer league?
I was not a huge fan because
I'm just making my pick while you talk. Go.
I was not a huge fan of Davis in his pre-draft profile. He's a strong rebounder for a guard, but there really wasn't a whole lot there other than slightly inefficient scoring. Didn't see good assist numbers, not there were defensive stats. So it wasn't a very appealing stat set. And obviously that got backed up by a pretty poor summer league performance when he was on a bad Wizards roster and should have been getting all the opportunity he wanted. He looked very passive. So it was not encouraging. I don't try to put too much stock in a summer league because we've seen cases like last year with Franz Wagner where he had a bad summer league and then was great during the season. But there's not a lot to like with Johnny Davis at this point other than the draft capital that was spent on him by Washington.
See, you're right. Wagner's numbers weren't good. I thought he looked good in Summer League last season. I was impressed with what he looked like. And we talk about Davis like on a terrible Summer League team who had everything could have been like focused around him. It's exactly the same situation that Keegan Murray was in, and Murray took full advantage of that. That Summer League roster is rough, and that's why I'm a little bit skeptical of some of Murray's numbers carrying over because he was the number 1 guy and the number 2 guy, whereas in Sacramento he's going to be the number 4 guy, maybe number 3 in the offense, and scaling that back is going to be interesting. But he took advantage of being, hey, I'm the guy in this Summer League team, I'm going to do everything, and I'm going to put up numbers, whereas Johnny Davis was in that situation and nothing worked out at all. After Johnny Davis went Paul Reed, Obi Toppin, Bogdanovich, and then a couple of Hayes, Killian Hayes and Jackson Hayes. I took, amazingly, yes, I did, I took Dylan Brooks. I don't know what came over me, but I did take him. Then went Usman Jang, which again is just a massive a dice roll. And then DeAndre Hunter. And now it's you, Matt. 17 seconds left. Let's go.
All right. Let's take some of the old fantasy.
Yeah.
Some of the fantasy stars of the past that we can add here. I'm going to also add on Kyle Lowry onto this as well because I think he's going to have a bounce back season. Last year was strange, missed a lot of time for personal reasons, wasn't in the best shape. I think he's going to be motivated to be able to have a stronger season. And maybe there's only one good Kyle Lowry season left, but for my roster, I think that's going to be helpful. And Hayward's going to have as much opportunity as he can handle with Bridges not playing most likely all season. He'll almost certainly get hurt, but I'm at this point picking around 170. I'm happy to be able to take what could easily be top 100 production from Hayward for 55, 60 games.
We're really deep into our bench here. Now I'm picking my 5th bench player, so I can take a little bit of upsidey sort of guys. Tom Bryant just goes next, who I think exceeds this number this season. I think he's going to be the starter over Damian Jones next to Anthony Davis. And I don't love Bryant as an on-court player necessarily with his lack of defense. He's a guy that has an opportunity to put up fantasy stats. Wow, Steven Adams MVP just loading up on guys in the draft here. Jeng and then AJ Griffin. So it's back to me. I'm going to take, again, it's a bit of a flyer. I'm going to take Daron Sharp. Just sit on the bench, see where we go. Maybe Claxton's not particularly robust in terms of physicality, so maybe Daron can jump in with some good numbers there. So I'm okay with getting him and sitting him on my bench.
I like Sharp a lot. He's a really strong rebounder. He's starting to develop
Really
some ability to be able to stretch out to 3. And we need to remember how the Nets have structured these contracts. Claxton has a couple more years on his deal on the extension that he just signed, but that means that Sharp has 3 years left. So they have the ability to be able to move on from Claxton, and that might happen before the end of those 2 years. Sharp easily could be set up to become the long-term starter at center there if he continues to be able to develop. And at this point, that's worth the opportunity.
It's really interesting, again, in Dynasty to see the way people value you guys. And who knows who's right or wrong. Because I see Usman Jeng go and AJ Griffin go. And then I see Dalen Terry go 1 pick after Daron Sharp. And I go, what's going on? They were not even remotely close to my consideration there. But who knows? It might change in 3 years where I go, man, that's a steal. Usman Jeng at pick 150 or whatever it is. But at this point, my valuation of those guys is just wildly different. After Dalen Terry was Lou Dort. I hope Ball Lives Matter here goes back-to-back on B. Bogdanovich's and takes Bojan just for the fun of it. We'll see whether that's what he actually does or not, or he or she, because I don't know who Ball Lives Matter is. Don't want to be sexist there. Marvin Bagley, yuck. All right, so I know this is not going to be the case, Matt, but when you look at Detroit's roster, Marvin Bagley should be not even a regular rotation play. He should be the 11th man in that rotation, in my opinion. Someone is going to miss out based on how their roster is structured. How do you see him playing? Do you think he's going to start? Do you think he's going to... He literally shouldn't play. But do you think that he's going to start?
So I am a lifelong Detroit Pistons fan, and sadly, I have to tell you that I do think Marvin Bagley probably will start because I think it's clear that Troy Weaver values him as someone who can be a starter. I think they also want to try to have his at least leaping ability, lob ability out there on the court with Cade Cunningham. That's what they featured a lot down the stretch last year. And I think they're going to do it. It's not going to work because ultimately, especially if you're playing Stewart too, I just don't really see how that's going to be able to fit on the court. I agree that Livers would give them the spacing that they actually need to be able to let Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey be maximized on the court. That should be the focus, but I don't think it will be.
It's going to be frustrating. Someone decent is going to miss out on a rotation spot because they paid Marvin Bagley too much. They paid too much to get Marvin Bagley into trade, which is you shouldn't pay anything, and then they paid him too much in terms of a contract, and then they're going to play him too many minutes. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he turns it around and becomes good, and I'll happily admit it if that is the case, but I doubt it. Taylor Horton-Tucker go. Actually, Bagley, Dinwiddie, Al Horford, good value there. Horton-Tucker, I've seen some people think he doesn't even play in the rotation for the Lakers this season, which, looking at their roster, it feels insane. Their roster is horrendously bad, but who knows? He wasn't particularly good last season. And then Westbrook goes there at that. Okay, here we go. Question. Nikola Jovic goes. I don't like him as a player at all, really. Westbrook goes there at pick 179. How many seasons do you reckon Westbrook plays in the NBA from here on out?
This could be over quickly. Speaking as a Detroit Pistons fan, it does feel a little bit like the end when, you're seeing Allen Iverson, jumping around to a couple teams where it's clear that he can't do what he wanted to on the court, but he's still trying. Westbrook, if he does not change his game, which there's no reason to think that he will, it could be out of the league within 1 or 2 seasons, especially because it appears based on his recent moves with his representation that he thinks that he should still be a starting player and not try to take a backseat as a role player to be able to prolong his career.
Absolutely. That is the concern that I think that after this contract goes or expires, that maybe he finds somewhere and people are offering him just a minimum or mid-level exception. He doesn't want to take it. Like, sometimes the end just comes. Like, Carmelo Anthony was okay for the Lakers last season. Is anyone signing him? It doesn't look like it. Like, who knows what's going to happen there? Like, obviously there's a lot of age difference there, but Melo at least adjusted his game. If Westbrook doesn't, then he's not going to play. After Jovic was Cam Thomas, Precious Achiuwa, Trey Mann, who I am not particularly high on, but it's fine to take him at this spot. And I'm at a little bit of a crossroads as to who I select with my next pick. We're still 4 or 5 away, so maybe I don't even have the option here. But there are a couple of Nuggets players who have slid down. That's Bruce Brown and Aaron Gordon, who are almost definitely going to exceed this draft spot for this coming season. They're not super old either, so it's more just, I guess, people are worried about that the upside is pretty limited playing with Jokic, Murray, and Porter, but at some point, like, that value there, having that reliable guy on the bench has some appeal. Like, I don't think, Matt, and you can disagree with me on this, you play more Dynasty leagues than I do, is that having your bench all stacked with upside is always the way to go, because you're going to get injuries in your top 10 or your starters, and having someone, if you are looking to be competitive and compete, that can come off the bench and provide numbers versus, like, I'm in a situation where I've got to throw Usman Jeng in there and he plays 1 minute and scores 1 point. That having a little bit of depth and current value on that bench is important.
That's right. I mean, we're into the 16th round at this point, so it's okay now to be able to be taking some players, with your final handful of picks that are going to just, not just kind of sit there, not play this year. You don't really need them in your playing rotation. You can still be competitive. That's why we have these deep rosters. But if you stack too many of those, you can waste good years from some of the top players that you selected because you lean too heavily on upside from guys who aren't going to play.
So we had Trey Mann, Robert Covington, Ayo Dosunmu, Kelly Oubre, David Roddy, which feels crazy to me. Again, I don't know who this guy is. He's a pick in the 20s who might literally never become a rotation player. There's other guys out there. Anyway, that's fine. Big Sweezy. We all make our decisions. Chuma Akiki. Then I went with Isaiah Livers. I really like the upside with Livers. Alex Caruso, Dorian Finney-Smith. Upside, but also Matt, as you said, Pistons fan. He might play this season, and I would be giving him 25 minutes a night straight off if I was Dwayne Casey. But if you took Bruce Brown, you bastard. If I was Dwayne Casey, I'd do a lot of things differently. What are you doing for this second pick after you stole Bruce Brown away from me?
Oh, that's difficult because there's, maybe is there one good Mike Conley season left? Maybe. Guys like John Wall are out there. Maybe he catches lightning in the bottle, but I think Reggie Jackson could end up being the more valuable player. We haven't seen Wall play good basketball in a long time. I think I'm going to stick with staying old and trying to win this year and keeping up with Mr. Black. I'm going to take a guy who I think could still have some productive time left in. That's Brook Lopez. I need a little help in blocks, and I think getting him this late will be helpful to me.
Here's a question for you that I asked, or that I answered on my show yesterday, so people who are listening to this might have heard this yesterday. What did John Wall average in Houston?
As far as like points, rebounds, assists?
What, do you remember what he averaged?
I don't. What are the numbers?
It was like 20 and 7 he averaged. It wasn't particularly efficient, but he still, in those 40 games, averaged 20 points and like 7 or 8 assists. So we haven't seen him play full seasons, but the last time he was on the court, he actually produced okay. So I don't really know where he goes from here, but that was after a 2-year layoff. He came back and dropped 20 points per game. Again, weird situation, high usage, low efficiency. I'm just going to take Jordan Clarkson here. But he did come back after that layoff and put up really, really strong numbers. We are still another year removed from that, or a year and a half removed from that. But yeah, he was relatively impressive in terms of just a pure volume situation in that time in Houston.
Yeah, I just don't see the volume being there.
Oh, no, it won't be. No, there's no way he's going to get that volume on this team. But I think people are under the impression that, A, he hasn't played in 4 years, which isn't true. And they're also under the impression that he sucked when he was out there. And that's not 100% true. He wasn't old John Wall, not even close. But he didn't 100% suck. I think that's more the point I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, he is, unlike Russell Westbrook, at least been saying publicly that he's willing to be able to take a little bit of a backseat relative to being the star player on the team. I think he referred to kind of being like number 3 behind Paul George and Kawhi. That's probably not even going to be the case in this roster. Maybe, if he has an especially good season. But I think that there's at least something there to be able to say that he's just ready to be on a good basketball team again.
I picked Jordan Clarkson at whatever that pick was, when Brook Lopez, Aaron Gordon, Steven Adams, Jordan Clarkson, then Malachi Branham, Usman Garuba, and Keon Johnson, who had a really good summer league, but might play 30 games in 5 minutes a night. Like, honestly, like, he is their 5th guard, I'm going to guess, behind Lillard, Simons, Hart, Sharp. Maybe he plays ahead of Sharp. He's got some upside, but I'm not sure. Actually, you know what? Scrap that. I don't hate it. I think there is good upside in him.
Yeah, I like him here because obviously, it's good growth of the summer league, and it's confusing with Portland. I think they're going to obviously try to push very hard to be a winning team this year at the outset. I don't think the bench is necessarily strong enough to be able to work unless they, are perfectly healthy within their starters. I could see them falling apart again, especially if they have obviously an injury to Damian Lillard again. But even if there are just some injuries, to Nurkic, it could get ugly a little bit quickly on this roster. And they have these young pieces that don't really fit into the plan of trying to push in for a playoff run this year.
No, it is an interesting roster. We'll be very intrigued to see how they work things and how the rotation looks and how lineups look and all that sort of stuff. Grant Williams goes after Blake Wesley. We talked about Wesley already, but he was the 3rd guard going out of that trio we talked about when we both thought that maybe he might be the best of the group. So that was interesting. Grant Williams, Tyus Jones, Mike Conley. So they are hoping for one more season out of him. Interesting that Harrison Barnes still sits there. He's going to obviously smash this value for at least one season. Well, there he goes at pick 204. That is some tremendous value from Barnes, who is one of the most anemic shot blockers ever as a 6'9", 40. He just never blocks shots. It's pretty weird. Oh, Christian Koloko. He was on my little queue. Hopefully I'd slide him through to round 20, but he goes there at number 18. Although, Matt, Christian Koloko, not on a roster, not signed. So I don't know what they're going to do with him. He's probably not going to play this season, though, because their roster already has, I think, 16 guys on it. And
Toronto's loading up with a bunch of non-guaranteed contracts.
Yeah.
Juancho Hernan-Gomez, DJ Wilson. I mean, there's a lot going on there. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle Koloko. You'd think where they selected him that they would be giving him a guaranteed contract, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yep, he's literally doesn't even have a non-guarantee. He's got nothing. He's just not signed yet. So be interesting to see where they slide him in. I also like that pick, Jalen Noel. I think Jalen Noel is going to have an interesting role this season. James Bouknight, wow, that's a name I never thought of. He was atrocious last season, but Charlotte I think is going to be really bad. So maybe there's an opportunity. Much like Johnny Davis, I didn't like him pre-draft, and his rookie season lived up to that expectation. Do you have him higher than this, or where are you at with Bouknight?
I'm a little bit lower on. Well, I have players higher than Bouknight at this point. I did not like the pre-draft profile from Bouknight, and I also don't really feel like Steve Clifford is going to want to play a guard who has inconsistent defensive effort at best, and it seemed to have some attitude issues as well last year. I think that could be a bad mix with the new coaching staff there in Charlotte.
I tend to agree. I'm not massively high on him, and wasn't remotely in my queue of guys to select. I am looking at, so after Bouknight was John Wall and then Jayshawn Tate, who I think is going to lose that starting job really quickly and will probably never be a starter in the NBA again, would be my guess. I think he's a solid player, good rotation guy. But yeah, the difference between him and like a Kenrich Williams in Oklahoma City, to me, they're a very similar player, just that Tate's been pushed into a larger role these first couple of seasons. Maybe he proves me wrong. I'm not massively high on him. Josh Christopher's at the top of my queue, and he's just gone. I'm thinking of rolling the dice on Rashawn Holmes. I know he's going to have a limited role this season, but there is still, like, if he starts, that's a top 50 player. Like, if he gets traded somewhere and starts, it's... What is that pick? So I'm sorry. Can you just talk about that pick while I just work out what I'm going to do here? Far out. That is wild.
Orlando Robinson is essentially a summer league. I think he might have gotten an Exhibit 10 contract, but I don't even think that's correct.
No, he didn't.
Even just been a summer league invite.
Yeah, he's not
for the Miami
anywhere.
Heat. This is something that everyone needs to be aware of. You have to be on the lookout for what the contract status of players are. I mean, even if you like someone in summer league, you need to know that they actually have a decent chance to be on an NBA roster or even part of an NBA organization's plans at all. And we don't have that for Robinson at this point. So it's really important to know your contracts, even if you're not in a contract league. And that's something that I think can give you a huge advantage in dynasty leagues by knowing how much investment teams have put into players, how many guaranteed years they have, whether they're on a two-way contract or not. Those are the things that you need to understand, especially with deeper sleepers.
Yeah, you're right. Like, I'm just going to double check this, but he's not even on an Exhibit 10. He's not even on their training camp roster at this point, Orlando Robinson. Like, he's okay, a bit of a slow-footed big out of Fresno State. I'm just double checking their roster, but the comment from Panda in the chat says he took Jokic in round 18. I've just got to wait a few years. I don't think that Jokic and Robinson are remotely the same. Like, Jokic should never have fallen that far. I didn't have him as the best player in the draft, of course. Actually, my bad. He is on an Exhibit 10. There you go. They must have just brought him in. It's him, Jamal Cain, and Jamari Boyea, who are on their Exhibit 10 deals. That must have been a recent addition. But that is still a crazy, crazy pick when there are other guys out. This is not a 30-round draft or anything like that. To me, that's pretty wild.
So I had my couple picks here and just kind of taking some swings on some per minute production. TJ Warren, obviously health, a huge question, but this is a guy who's been around a top 50 player in production in previous seasons and could have a lot of opportunity in Brooklyn, depending on how the rest of their offseason goes. And then Chris Boucher, who I don't think is going to get to play big minutes, but when he does get to play, there's good fantasy production that comes with it. They did re-sign him, which shows some investment into him, and hopefully that means he's out of Nick Nurse's doghouse for long enough to be able to give you some numbers.
Yeah, almost no chance he's out of Nick Nurse's doghouse, unfortunately, because he is 30, and I don't think he's improved the things that Nurse hates. And if they are healthy, he will struggle. But at this point, who cares? Like, it's really good value now. I was debating between Rashawn Holmes and Will Barton with my last selection. I took Holmes, so now I'm going to go a little bit more upside with my pick, assuming that Steven Adams' MVP doesn't take Santi Aldama away from me. Aldama, with Jaron Jackson out, maybe he's in the rotation straight away. Maybe he's not. But they took him with a first-round pick last season, albeit pick 30. He looked great in Summer League, and I'll take that flyer on him. Oh, he is available because Seth Curry just went one pick before. Let's take Santi there and throw him in. Do you have... Am I on an island there with Aldama? Do you have any view on his upside?
I didn't have a lot of optimism about Aldama after his rookie year, but obviously it was a strong summer league performance where it showed real growth. And Memphis just tends to, knock these picks out of the park and find a lot of value later on in the draft. So at some points, you're just willing to invest in an organization that seems to know more than, the general NBA fan population does. And I think Memphis had a great draft this year. A lot of guys that I like in fantasy, a lot of pre-draft profiles that I liked. They saw something in Aldama to take him where they did last year. And I think it's worth the investment at this stage of a dynasty start.
Yep. Good, because I did it. After him went Goga, and then went RJ Hampton and KJ Martin in Houston. We're down to, we've both only got one pick left in this draft, so we're getting close towards the end of this draft. Will you go young again, do you think, with your last pick? Or will you just look, because your last 3 picks, 4 picks, 5 picks, 6 picks, 7 picks, 8 picks have all been like veteran type players. You don't really have many absolute flyer upside guys.
No, I mean, and this is something that I wanted to be able to talk about. I mean, especially when you're talking about 12-team dynasty leagues, kind of your standard dynasty league, maybe with more casual players in it, depending on where you're playing. The average dynasty league, there have been studies that show, and I think this is from fantasy football, but it applies to fantasy basketball as well. The leagues on average last about 4 years, and that's the league lasting that long relative to how long you're going to be interested in the league. So I think one of the biggest market inefficiencies in dynasty leagues is just trying to win them. And it might not be as exciting as getting young players and watching them break out, but I think there can be a lot of value in these startups, just collecting a team that's going to be able to win immediately in the first year. And if you have a good team with good players, even if they're older, you're going to be able to trade them because they were productive. So I think that's something to be able to consider when you're doing this, and what was my strategy here in this startup.
Yeah, agree. Like, go in general in a dynasty league. I tried to go a little bit younger here, but in general, I'm just like, I almost treat it like a redraft and just try to win the first 2 years and then adjust from there and see what happens, because we're not NBA GMs and they screw up the NBA draft all the time. So these guys that get picked at certain spots, they don't always turn out good. In fact, a lot of the time they don't. After KJ went Larry Nance, Max Strus, Corey Kispert, Zach Collins, Isaac Okoro, Andre Drummond, Bojan Bogdanovic. It's pretty good value there. Aaron Nesmith. I don't think he's an NBA player at all. Omer Yurtseven. I'm not sure about him. Maybe he put up good numbers last season in a interesting situation that was really tailored to him putting up those numbers and then fell off completely. I like this Juice McBride pick. Then we go to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I've got on my queue Will Barton and Jose Alvarado. So I'm hoping one of those guys gets to me. The other guy I could consider... I'll tell you I want to hear your opinion on this guy. What do you think of Jalen McDaniels in Charlotte?
Well, he's got a lot of potential, and there's a lot of potential for him in that rotation. If they don't end up leaning heavily on Cody Martin as much as they did last year, who is a good player, and I think he's going to play a decent amount, but there isn't the level of upside that you could get from a Jalen McDaniels. So I think it's a worthy stash at the end of a dynasty roster.
I've just realized that this guy is also available, and that's Zeke Naji. I think he's got some really big upside. So I've got Barton, Alvarado, McDaniels, and Naji. Last pick, upside-ish play. Alvarado's got the steals value, obviously. Can he ever be a starting point guard? Maybe Pat Beverly-like career, which is still pretty solid. Naji, he was really cracking on until that ankle injury last season. There's McDaniels. Let's go with... I'm going to take Zeke. All right, let's take Zeke. So that leaves 3 picks left. Who do you want to fall to you here?
Well, there's a few guys, young guys, who are kind of post-hype guys who, maybe there's still a little glimmer of hope that as second contract players. Kobe White has completely fallen off the map. I don't even know if he's going to play for Chicago this year, but he has had productive moments and is a guy who has shown an ability to be able to dribble, shoot, pass a little bit. Maybe there's a second team for him if he gets away from Chicago and doesn't have so many guards around him, where he could end up becoming a somewhat productive combo guard.
Yep, I can see that completely. And there's guys like Isaiah Roby's still there, Devontae Graham's there, Nikhil Alexander-Walker. Imagine where he would have been drafted this time last year.
It was very high. There's a lot of pain if you look back at our ADP over the last couple of years of data that I have. And you can find all of that on our website. You can look back 2 years into the past that I've been collecting this data. And it really is sobering to see some of the things that people were doing in dynasty startup drafts that they now deeply regret.
Darius Baisley, Terrence Mann, these guys are still available. We're 200 deep here, 240 deep, and these guys are still available. So there is still quite a bit of depth available. Mason Plumlee is going to be a starting center, I think, for Charlotte, and he's still there. So that's on the wire. Lonnie Walker might start for the Lakers. He's still available. Grayson Allen's going to start for the Bucks. Not that he's good, but he's still available. So after Naji went Agbaji, Kobe White did go, so you got stolen away from you there, Matt. So what are you doing? Last pick, round this out.
I'm going to round it out with Darius Baisley, who's still exceptionally young. Played a lot of minutes last year. I think he's probably been drafted over to some degree, but I don't think it's necessarily the end of the road for him. A guy that I think has shown some flashes at points, and I think it could either get an opportunity on a second team or maybe get to play a little bit for the Thunder as their rotation deepens throughout the year.
Absolutely no problem with taking Baisley with that last selection. So before we get out of here, do you want to just let me know what your run through your final team and let me know what you how you view it and your overall thoughts on the draft?
I think overall, I ended up with a pretty competitive team here with some youth at the top, but obviously some risk and age in the next couple of years. This is a roster that is going to be pretty volatile and is probably going to be using the injured reserve quite a bit throughout the season. In my starting lineup, pretty good collection of young guards between Darius Garland, De'Aaron Fox, and Terry Rozier. On the forward line, this could be exceptionally strong, especially from a per game perspective. Karl-Anthony Towns, Zion Williamson, Kwai Leonard, and then rounded it out with Nikola Jokic, Yusuf Nurkic, Chris Paul, and then in my final flex spot, I have Brandon Clark. So I think that's a pretty strong starting lineup. There's some other strong teams also in this startup that we just drafted, but I think I'll be competitive in year one with this group. On the bench, like I said, there's a lot of guys who are a little bit older, whether it's Gordon Hayward, Kyle Lowry, Brook Lopez. So any number of those guys could play less than 50 games this year. You could easily see that. But I was able to get some guys that I like from a per minute perspective, whether it's a Mitchell Robinson, a DeAnthony Melton, that are going to be able to help fill in my lineup and probably play a good number of games. So this was competitive of a roster to be able to put together while still having some youth, and I like the build of it.
It is a strong team. If I'm looking through my projections for how this would go for year one, you actually come out on top. Really close up there with Mr. Black. You are the top two teams, and then it's Brant Hoover and myself up the top in the top four there for this coming season. Your average age is 28, same as Mr. Black. Mine is 24. The youngest team is Pandas Underdogs with an average age of just under 22. He's skewed really, really young. And then Monkey Tennis had an average age of 23. So I believe my team is the third youngest team, which I'm happy with, considering I think I got a bunch of guys who are going to contribute right at the moment. So if I go to my team, which you can see here on YouTube over on the screen over to the right, it's Halliburton, Gilgeous-Alexander, Kevin Porter, Rob Williams, Porzingis, Keldon Johnson, Alperen Şengün, Michael Porter Jr., Isaiah Jackson, Emmanuel Quickley, Cameron Johnson, Trey Murphy, Monty Morris, Dylan Brooks, Day'Ron Sharpe, Isaiah Livers, Jordan Clarkson, Rashawn Holmes, Santi Aldama, and Zeke Naji is how my squad finished off. Matt, that was great. Thanks for being a part of this Dynasty mock and getting to do it with us finally after last year's false start. It was great to do this Dynasty mock. And again, follow Matt on Twitter at NBA Dynasty NBA Dynasty ADP, and the website, which is FBI-basketball.com. So go and check that out and check out all of his leagues. Matt, thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
And that will, of course, do us for today. Don't forget to follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. If you are here and you're still watching, hey, what did you think of my team? What pick did you like the most out of the whole draft? Which team did you like the most? How would you have approached it? What would you have done differently? Hope you've been commenting as we've been doing it, but drop it in the comments now down below as well. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.